It was 5:17 a.m. when the knocking began. Half awake and wearing pajamas, Richard Hale ambled to the front door and looked through the peephole. What he saw initially made no sense. Flashlights piercing the blackness, men in tactical vests, badges catching the beam. Soon, Larue, Kentucky's everybody's quiet delivery man, was being hustled down the sidewalk in handcuffs. Neighbors stood in their doorways, stunned, watching the scene unfold. Richard Hale, you're under arrest for the murder of Ava Hall. The officer's words hung heavy in the cold March air, as if the whole town had suddenly stopped breathing. For 23 years, Larue residents had wondered what became of Ava, the young pharmacy clerk who disappeared without warning in 2000. For 23 years, they'd been passing her killer on the street and never had a clue. It wasn't some stranger or overt threat. It was Rick, the friendly delivery man who always made time for a conversation, who coordinated the Thanksgiving food drive, who taught Sunday school at First Baptist. His pickup was a common sight at all the high school football games. He'd even assisted in the search for Ava when she originally went missing. But now prosecutors allege that he'd been hiding her car keys, like some macabre trophy, in a locked box under his bed all along. The news is news at leap all along. The news it says led in luring lagat third chi. It trolls and the morning stingerly aborther. The news lays didn't quill at unravel. How could someone so trusted, so woven into the daily life of this small Kentucky town be hiding something so horrifying? How could the same man who played with neighborhood kids and bowed his head in church every Sunday have carried that secret for over 2 decades? As the inquiry progressed, it would lay bare a web of obsession, dishonesty, and cold-blooded violence that had lain hidden under Larue's gracious facade for too long. But before we dive deeper into this haunting case, do me a quick favor. Hit that subscribe button. This channel is all about uncovering the real stories behind the headlines, the twists, the human side, the long shadows left behind. If you're fascinated by the ways justice finally catches up, no matter how many years have passed, you're in the right place. Now, let's return to the beginning. And as we do, let me ask you in the comments, where are you? To really appreciate the significance of what went down in Larue, we must meet Ava Hall, not just a name on the pages of a cold case file, but as a living, breathing member of the town itself. Ava Marie Hall was born on June 3, 1973, the single daughter of Daniel and Linda Hall. Larue was a tiny town, just more than 8,000 residents, and the type of town where everyone knew everybody's business, sometimes before you did. Ava stood out, not because she was loud or flashy, but because she was kind. Classmates described her as sunshine in human form. She remembered birthdays, she brought homemade cookies to school for no reason at all, and she had a way of making people feel seen. The Halls resided in a 2-story white colonial on Sycamore Drive, the one with the wraparound porch where Ava enjoyed sitting on summer evenings reading mystery novels. Her dad worked at the town lumber mill for almost 40 years, and her mom taught second grade at Larue Elementary. They were the epitome of small-town Americana. Ava was the best of both of us, Daniel Hall would go on to say to reporters, his voice shaking. She inherited Linda's heart and my obstinacy. Once she set her mind to something, there was no way to change it. That resolve led Ava all the way to the University of Kentucky, where she was the first in her family to graduate from college. She graduated in 1996 with a pharmacy degree, an achievement she funded herself, holding 2 jobs in the process. Her graduation picture, Ava smiling between her beaming parents, would go on to adorn missing person posters and news reports. Following college, Ava received job offers at Louisville and Lexington big city pharmacies, but she decided to return home. "This is where I belong," Ava explained to her college roommate, Jennifer Wilkins. "These are my people. They deserve someone behind the counter who knows their grandkids' names." By 2000, Ava had spent 4 years working at Larue Family Pharmacy. The old brick building occupied the corner of Main and Elm, a small hub where folks came not only for prescriptions but for counsel, chat, and a smile from Ava Hall. Older customers would just pop by the Larue family pharmacy to visit with Ava. She knew all of their histories, their meds, their allergies, even which grandkid had gone off to college. She knew who required deliveries because they no longer drove, and who required her to read slow, and who required her to read slows. She was not simply giving out pills, said Margaret Dawson, owner of the pharmacy. She was giving out care. That young woman had a gift of making everyone feel that they counted. Outside of the office, Ava invested that same warmth into her community. Saturday mornings brought her to the Larue Public Library, reading children's picture books to wide-eyed little ones. Sundays, she was a member of the First Presbyterian Choir, her bright Sis. And weeknights, she played softball with the town's co-ed team, despite laughingly confessing she couldn't even get a hit. But that was Ava. She appeared, she engaged, and she made people feel included. Her offstage life was the same steady warmth. For almost 2 years, she had been dating Michael Thornton, a nearby high school history teacher. Friends said their relationship was easy and comfortable, the kind based on quiet affection and values, not fire. They'd even started discussing marriage, though they hadn't made anything official yet. We were going slow, Michael explained to police later, his voice empty from nights spent awake. Ava said she wanted to be sure before committing to something like that. That was just who she was. She overthought things. Ava resided in a tiny one-bedroom apartment above the town's sole bookstore. The apartment was cozy and much loved. Books heaped off the shelves, pot plants lining the windowsills, and one covered in framed photographs of friends and loved ones. Her neighbors referred to her as the ideal tenant, quiet, pleasant, the kind who'd deliver you muffins out of the blue and gather your mail when you were away. Then October 12th, 2000 rolled around, a Thursday morning that started like any other in Larue. The air had that sharp edge of fall, the kind that has you reaching for a sweater before you leave the house. The sidewalks were covered in red and gold leaves, and downtown was that quiet, small-town feel that always precedes winter. Ava pulled into work exactly on time, 7:45 a.m., 15 minutes ahead of schedule as always. The security camera at the pharmacy recorded her driving into her designated parking space in her silver Toyota. Base in her silver Toyas. She was dressed in a light blue sweater and navy slacks, with her hair neatly tucked back. The rest of the day, she conducted her normal routine, filling prescriptions, welcoming patients, and assisting Mrs. Abernathy in choosing a birthday card for her grandson. The security tapes later revealed her laughing and chatting with customers, checking inventory, and making a brief telephone call at lunchtime. That call, as later confirmed by police, was to her mother, a chat about weekend activities. At 5:30 p.m., as the sun fell low over Main Street, Ava closed up the pharmacy for the evening. The final seconds of her on-camera reveal her arming the alarm, pulling her light jacket closer against the wind, and walking across the empty parking lot toward her car. Across the way, Tom Gentry, the owner of the hardware store, was locking E. Ava greeted happily as she passed by. Those would be the final words anyone would ever hear her utter. Tom later informed police he witnessed her come to her car and drop her keys. She stooped to retrieve them, and he moved away to complete locking his door. When he looked back a few seconds later, the car was still parked there, but Ava was not. He assumed she had gone back into the pharmacy for something that she had forgotten and didn't think much. But the following morning, when Margaret Dawson came in to open up and noticed Ava's car still parked in the same location, apprehension took hold quickly. The driver's side door was ajar. On the passenger seat lay Ava's purse, wallet unopened and containing $43 in cash, her credit cards, and her driver's license intact. Her cell phone, a small Nokia that she had recently purchased, sat in the center console. A single missed call indicated on the screen from her mother the previous night at 7:30 p.m., But something about the scene didn't quite compute. Ava's car keys, hers, along with the apartment and pharmacy keys, remained on the keychain lying on the ground next to her car, half hidden beneath. Exactly where Tom Gentry recalled seeing her crouch down. Within a matter of hours, the Larue Police Department had opened a missing persons case. At dusk, hundreds of volunteers were combing the woods behind the pharmacy, flashlights slicing through the darkness as they called her name into the trees. Search dogs followed her scent, but it disappeared as suddenly at the edge of the parking lot, implying that perhaps she had boarded another car. Weeks turned into months, months into years. Yet, no sign of Uggs, no sign of Uggs, no sign of Uggs, no sign of Uggs, no sign of Uggs. The citizens of Larue refused to throw in the towel. Telephone poles throughout 3 counties were covered in flyers. The town held prayer vigils in the town square, candles lit in the crisp night air. They even collected money to bring in private investigators when the official search lost steam. The local shops put up her picture in their front windows, and in a dramatic expression of community solidarity, the town water tower was adorned with a huge banner reading simply, "Bring Ava home." But Ava Hall was gone completely, utterly, leaving behind a shocked town and a heartbroken family. The not knowing is the worst part, her mother, Linda Hall, said in an interview with reporters on the 1-year anniversary of her daughter's vanishing. Is she suffering? Is she dead? Should we is she dead? Should we be with her? Should we be wishing too? Is she dead? Should we be with her? Should be said? Should we be go? Every time the phone rings, I stop my heart. Every time they discover an unidentified body in Kentucky, we hold our breath. As the years went on and the investigation dragged, Larue did what small towns tend to do. It kept going, but never actually moved forward. The pharmacy finally filled the position of its departed pharmacist. Michael Thornton, shattered by loss, slipped away quietly. Search parties diminished, then ceased. The case faded from headlines, becoming one of those local tragedies whispered about at diners or shared with newcomers in hushed tones. But for those who truly knew Ava, time stood still. Her parents left her room just the way she'd left it, the made bed, the bookshelf full of her beloved novels, the photo frames covered in dust, but never relocated. They made her special chocolate cake every June on her birthday. And every evening at supper, they left an empty seat at the table, a silent, obstinate reminder that someday she would return. What actually happened to Ava Hall on that autumn night? Where did she disappear after waving at Tom Gentry? And how did a person like Richard Hale, the affable delivery driver, the church-attending neighbor everyone knew and trusted, end up at the center of one of Kentucky's most eerie mysteries? Before we dive in, I want of Kentucky's most eerie mysteries. Before we dive in, I want of Kentucky's most eerie mysteries. Before we dive in, I want of Did your community ever deal with a case that altered the way people lived their everyday lives? Perhaps it made people more vigilant, or perhaps it united them together. Let me know in the comments. I read them all. Ava Hall's disappearance transformed Larue overnight. By morning on October 14th, only 36 hours since she'd last been seen, the parking lot of the pharmacy had become ground zero for a community in crisis. Yellow police tape waved gently in the wind as forensic investigators in white jumpsuits searched every inch of Ava's silver Toyota Corolla. Cameras snapped, evidence markers covered the ground, and an air of stunned fear hung in the air. Sheriff Jim Donovan, a 28-year member of the Larue County Sheriff's Department, personally took control of the investigation. 6'4" and grizzled-faced, with an expression that brooked no argument, Donovan was an old-school lawman with a steady, thorough, and relentless approach. He'd worked everything from bar brawls to bank robberies, but never a case like this one. "This isn't like Ava," he told the hastily assembled search teams that morning, his voice carrying across the lot. "She doesn't just disappear. She doesn't leave her purse behind. Something happened here. She doesn't leave her purse behind. Something happened here, Sliffle." The reaction was swift and wholesale. Deputies canvassed doors to doors, speaking with every business owner and resident in a 3-block area. State police sent officers with cadaver dogs to sweep the wooded areas outside the parking lot. Volunteers poured in from surrounding towns, arriving in pickup trucks and on ATVs, prepared to search fields, barns, and creek beds. At noon, a special edition of the Larue Herald was published with Ava's beaming ease. Local radio stations interrupted regular programming with breaking reports, and they urged callers to come forward with information. And although Larue's internet technology was in its infancy, people quickly put up a Find Ava Hall site, a virtual bulletin board that would soon get more than 50,000 hits as people around Kentucky tracked the story. Considering it was only a town of 8,000, the reaction was nothing less than foray. Mayor Frank Wilson soon converted the high school gymnasium into a full-fledged command center. Within, volunteers stood in line to sign up, receive search assignments, and gather armloads of missing persons flyers. The local phone company set up a dedicated hotline for tips. Restaurants donated meals for searchers working long hours in the field. The Red Cross arrived with blankets, coffee, and logistical support. "I've never seen anything like it," recalled Deputy Sarah Matt, who was barely a year into her career at the time. "It was like the whole town became a single organism with one goal: find Ava." The search operation widened quickly. Units scoured fields and backroads in tight grid patterns, marking the areas cleared on huge maps that covered the walls of the gymnasium. Horseback units scoured ravines that were too steep to drive down. Volunteer pilots also took to the air, flying over the county's farmland and river meanders in search of anything out of the ordinary. Even cave rescue units were deployed to search the limestone caves that dotted the area. At the same time, the forensic unit searched Ava's silver Toyota Corolla from stem to stern. What they discovered was disturbing, not due to what was present there, but due to what was not. No fight signs. The vehicle was out. Her purse remained on the passenger seat, wallet intact, cash, credit cards, all left untouched. Her prescription pad from the pharmacy remained demure in the glove compartment. A half-full bottle of water remained in the cup holder. Everything appeared as if Ava had just been preparing to drive home. But then came one revelation that shook everything. The driver's side door handle and her keychain, the one that was discovered under the car, had been thoroughly erased of fingerprints, even Ava's own. Someone wiped those surfaces, Sheriff Donovan informed his team at the first big briefing, and it wasn't Ava. She wouldn't erase her own prints off her car keys. That one piece of information turned the case from a missing persons report into an alleged abduction, maybe even premeditated abduction, maybe even premeditated death notes. As days passed with no Ava in sight, the mood in Larue became less panicked and more devastated. 3 days into her missingness, Pastor Robert Jenkins of First Presbyterian Church, where Ava was a member of the choir, arranged a candlelight vigil in town square. Over 2,000 people came. Their candles formed a stream of light running through downtown Larue, coming to a quiet rally in the parking lot of the pharmacy. Ava's mother, Linda, and father, Daniel Hall, stood at the podium, pale and tired, relying on each other for support. "Our daughter is out there somewhere," Daniel began to say, his voice wavering. "Someone must know something. Please, if you know anything, please come forward. We just want our baby back." The vigils grew into a weekly ritual, then monthly as hope grew taut. But they were no longer just about locating Ava, that had given way to being the town's way of dealing, of hanging on to belief amidst fear. Larue had always been that kind of town where doors were left open and everyone waved at every passing vehicle. That was altered overnight. "We lost two things when Ava disappeared," Mayor Wilson would later remark. They constructed an in-depth timeline of Ava's last day, questioning all customers who'd gone into the pharmacy. They pored over her phone records, bank accounts, and emails, searching for anything out of the ordinary, anything that might indicate she'd been the target. One question oversaw all the discussions. Why had Ava's bag been abandoned, yet her keys weren't within the vehicle? If she'd been kidnapped, why take the car? If she'd walked out herself, why? According to the common sense of the early 2000s, when nearly nobody ever went anywhere without their faithful Nokia, this didn't seem like a runaway. Like someone just wanted her, Detective Ray Simmons told one of the department's evening briefings. Not her stuff, not her cash, just Ava. Detectives started scrutinizing the individuals who populated Ava's world, anyone who could have had a motive, anyone whose warm smile could have concealed something sinister. The initial round of questioning, of course, involved Ava's closest contacts, a routine first step in any missing persons investigation. Ava's boyfriend, Michael Thornton, was one of the first to meet with detectives. His alibi was spotless. That Thursday night, October 12th, he'd been coaching basketball practice until 7 p.m. in the presence of 20 students and 2 other teachers. Afterwards, he'd driven directly to his parents' home for dinner and arrived at about 7:30 and remained until just after 11. His mother verified it, and cell tower data. What hit everybody wasn't only the good alibi, it was Michael's grief. He appeared drained, a man keeping himself upright by willpower alone. He went out with the search parties, assisted in distributing posters, even took a day off from teaching to devote himself to finding Ava. When official searches were dissolving, he spent his own money to get a private detective. Sheriff Donovan put it bluntly, Michael loved her. He's grieving, not Heis loved her. He's grieving, not Heis. With Michael in the clear, police shifted their focus to Ava's work. Pharmacists, after all, regularly encounter people at their worst, desperate, angry, or both. A search of her incident reports showed several explosive arguments in the months leading up to her vanishing. One name jumped out quickly, Curtis Leach, a 42-year-old contractor with a history of trouble. 3 weeks prior to Ava's disappearance, Leach had burst into the pharmacy with a prescription for oxycodone, one Ava instantly recognized as tampered. She declined to fill it, and he became loud and menacing. The store manager intervened. Witnesses remembered Leach yelling something about making her regret it. Of course, he landed right at the head of the suspect list. Deputies caught up with him days later, loading his pickup truck, saying he was going to Tennessee on a fishing expedition. The timing was suspiciously convenient. They questioned him for hours, but Curtis remained consistent, and infuriatingly, the evidence supported him. A security camera 70 miles away in Louisville caught him sitting at a video poker machine from late afternoon till almost 9 p.m. that evening. The timestamp synchronized his receipt to the second. I didn't care for the girl for not giving me my meds, Leach said, but I would hurt no one over pills. That's crazy talk. And yet another promising lead went up in smoke. Detectives widened the search once again, searching every registered sex offender in a 50-mile radius, examining recent parolees, and investigating similar missing persons cases in adjacent counties. Each lead flared briefly, then extinguished on another dead end. By December 2000, the search effort had faded from its initial intensity. The high school gym command center came down. The phone hotline remained idle most days. The Find Ava Hall website remained up, but news became fewer and farther between. Nevertheless, Sheriff Donovan would not close the book. He put Detective Mark Ellison, a soft-spoken, methodical man with a reputation for having a keen sense about people, to continue working on the case part-time. Each Monday morning, invariably, Ellison would sit down at his desk, open Ava's file, lay out the photos and reports, and scan them for something, anything, that could have been overlooked. And then, on a chilly February morning in 2001, he found it. Beneath the surface of the early witness interviews lay one-minute detail that had never been pursued. Ava's last confirmed eyewitness to life, Tom Gentry, owner of the hardware store, had testified seeing a black pickup truck parked by the pharmacy at closing time. He hadn't given it much mind at first. There were trucks all over rural Kentucky, but the way he said it got Ellison's attention. "Just sitting there," Gentry had said. "Engine didn't see anyone in it." That little remark triggered alarm bells. Ellison instructed at once the examination of all available security cameras within the vicinity, convenience stores, gasoline stations, even a dusty old feed supply lot on the opposite side of the street. Somewhere, he prayed, that truck had left a mark. Too bad the only camera that might have captured that part of the parking lot was the one belonging to the bank on the other side of the street, and it retained its recordings for only 30 days. By the time Tom Gentry's report of the black pickup truck was marked as significant, the recording had already been wiped over. Another potential lead lost. As the first anniversary of Ava's vanishing drew near, frustration loomed over Larue. There was still no body, no concrete suspects, and no evidence other than those erased fingerprints, a ghostly reminder that someone had gone out of their way to obfuscate their trail. The Hall family did not sit back. With the assistance of friends and neighbors, they collected a $50,000 reward for information that would lead Ava home. They were featured on local and national missing persons TV shows. Her face even appeared on playing cards handed out to inmates, part of an effort that had cracked cold cases elsewhere. But in Ava's situation, the phone lines remained silent. Detective Ellison attempted to keep the family's hopes intact. "Sometimes cases go quiet before they break open," he assured the Hall softly one week when he stopped by. "We haven't forgotten Ava. We won't forget her." What no one knew then was that the black pickup truck, that tiny, nearly insignificant detail, would someday serve as the thread that pulled would unravel it all. What are your thoughts on cold cases such as this? Do you think the advancements in technology, DNA analysis, digital forensics, AI facial recognition increase the chances that decades-old enigmas will finally be brought to justice? I'd love to hear your comments. In the small dining room of the Hall family house on Sycamore Drive, time had frozen in one sorrowful respect. Every night at 6:30 p.m., Linda Hall laid out 3 plates for dinner, 2 plates loaded with food, and 1 never filled with food before an empty chair. For 7,305 straight nights, over 20 years, that tradition never varied. "People think we're crazy," Linda admitted in a rare interview 5 years after Linda admitted in a rare interview 5 years after folks were the bar invaded as a live for fun. When so ring. Kettlebells, the Arctic crowd is it's people of worth in car. Even people who are saying like it's simply let him reference with it. I think we're stuck in denial. But this isn't about pretending she's coming through the door. It's about refusing to give up hope. That empty chair became something greater than a symbol. It was a wound etched into the beat of daily life. The Halls never uttered Ava's name in the past tense. They never had a memorial service. And each June 3rd, they celebrated her birthday with her favorite chocolate raspberry cake from Mercer's Bakery in downtown. Whenever someone lightly hinted that perhaps they did require closure, Daniel Hall would reply the same way each time. "Until somebody produces a body," he'd assert, "my daughter is missing, not dead." The initial year since Ava disappeared was a blur of desperate activity. The Halls remortgaged their house to pay for private detectives. They appeared on national television programs, distributed flyers at truck stops in 5 states, and pursued leads personally that always dwindled just short of solutions. Linda went on leave from school. Daniel spent all his sick and vacation time tracking down sightings. Even their answering machine message was incorporated into the search. "You've reached the Halls. We can't come to the phone right now because we're searching for our daughter, Ava. Please leave a message, or if you have information, call the hotline." The price paid to their health arrived promptly and ruthlessly. In 6 months, Daniel, never before with blood pressure issues, was on medication. Linda lost 30 pounds and insomnia that would plague her for the next 20 years. Their hair turned gray prematurely. The lines that surfaced weren't from smiling, but from worry, fear, and sleepless nights. I aged 20 years a year. Every morning I'd look in the mirror and barely recognize the person staring back. Then there was the financial burden. Reward money, travel, detectives, it all mounted quick. In 18 months, their savings were depleted. In 2002, they had to sell their vacation cabin on Lake Cumberland, a family heirloom where Ava had learned to swim and fish. The loss affected Daniel the most. That cabin had belonged in his family for three generae in Urilean. He'd always pictured retiring there one day, perhaps watching Ava bring her own children to fish off the same dock. "It's just nails and wood," Daniel quietly replied as he turned over the keys to the new owners. He did not flinch, but those around him could perceive the cost it took. As the active search receded, the Halls found themselves living a surreal limbo-like state, a life stuck between sorrow and hope, between the imperative to move on and the refusal to release the final moment they had seen Ava alive. They channeled that energy into action. Linda and Daniel joined forces to start the Ava Hall Foundation, a charity that worked with families of missing adults and sought to make law enforcement's response more effective in such cases. It became Linda's new passion. She left teaching early and immersed herself in the work, applying her educator's precision and empathy to make something positive of tragedy. She authored blue books for police departments, chaired support groups for families, and even lobbied state legislators to raise money for cold case units. It filled her with purpose, but it also meant she spent each day surrounded by reminders of her own loss. Daniel handled it differently. He took refuge in action, in bodily work in days so long and hard there was no time to think. He added on to their house, an apartment he referred to Uju Haslat Frills at Chuar Hanbiflist. He referred to Ab to Asur. It was Kurt reasons Chile Urilik. Furless Tani Rise in Sleeping Morhus at Jerusalem. He asked an apartment he referred to as Katsurs, a Garsapator. He spent his weekends hiking the forest around Larue, sometimes with search dogs, sometimes alone, always with quiet hope burning in his heart. He kept meticulous journals, noting every search, every call, every dream about Ava that seemed important, anything that could one day be important. But as usually occurs when sorrow is deep, their union started to crumble under the pressure. They had been strong for almost 30 years, but now were beginning to surge the crumble. Nearly 3/4 of parents who lose a child go on to split up. Statistics reveal, not through lack of affection, but because grieving manifests itself in incompatible forms. "There were times when we hardly spoke," Linda eventually confessed in a 2010 interview, "not because we were mad, but because we were drowning in our own sorrow." Daniel had to keep going. I had to vent. We were grieving in different languages. The turning point was on what would have been Ava's 35th birthday in 2008. As they did annually, the Halls made her favorite cake and boxed a couple of gifts to give to charities for children. But that night, Daniel spoke quietly to Linda, saying he wanted to petition Ava as legally dead, not because he'd lost hope, but because her life insurance would be used to boost the reward fund. Linda was devastated. To her, it felt like she packed a bag and checked into a motel for 3 days. "That was our darkest moment," Daniel later said softly. "I thought I'd lost my daughter and my wife." What finally salvaged them was the advice of a grief counselor, Dr. Eleanor Matthews, an expert in ambiguous loss, the heartless type of grieving where there is no closure, no body to bury, no evidence of what occurred. Dr. Matthews gave them an eye-opener about how although they had Linda lost a daughter she carried 9 months, Dr. Matthews told Daniel. "You lost the daughter you taught to ride a bike and change a tire. Those are related, but different, and your grief will look different because of that." That epiphany marked a turning point. Through counseling, the Halls learned how to allow each other room to grieve separately while still learning to be together. They established a rule: no Ava Tuesdays, a day a week when they wouldn't On those days, they'd see a movie, go out to eat at new restaurants, or simply sit together on the porch swing, enjoying a silence that wasn't weighed down by grief. Those brief moments of normalcy, as tenuous as they were, kept their marriage intact, but the vacant chair at meals never departed, an unspoken observer to both their agony and tenacity. Even their larger family wasn't left alone. Linda's sister Judith, who resided in Cincinnati, had been here for months after Ava initially disappeared, coordinating searches, comforting the Halls, maintaining the household. But as years passed, her stays became shorter and less frequent. The relentless sorrow that filled the Hall household was just too much for strangers to bear for long. Folks can run with you in an acute emergency, Linda mused years later, her tone even but firm. But when the emergency is chronic, they need to return to their own world. We learned not to resent that. She and Daniel had learned it the hard way. Daniel's brother, Thomas, a cop down in Nashville, did it differently. He called every Sunday. Whether there was anything else to do or not, Daniel could bet on that ring. The call always began the same way. Any news? And when Daniel quietly said no, Thomas never pressed. He'd simply respond, "We'll get there," and steer the conversation toward family updates or the Titans game. That steady, no-pressure presence became a lifeline for Daniel, a reminder that not all support comes in grand gestures. Sometimes it's just showing up, week after week, even when there's nothing new to say. But the most complicated relationship during those years was with Michael Thornton, Ava's boyfriend at the time she went missing. For the first 3 years, Michael was as committed as anyone in the family. He went to every vigil, sat down with the Halls for Sunday meals, always at the empty chair, and even assisted with keeping the Find Ava Hall website up to date. He was, in so many ways, their adopted son. Then, in 2004, Michael accepted a teaching position in Colorado. When Linda found out, she was furious. As he loaded the last of his boxes into his car, she stood in the driveway, tears streaking her face. "She's still missing, and you're just leaving," she cried. "What if she comes back and you're gone?" Daniel, watching the anguish on both their faces, laid a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "He's not leaving her, Lynn," he spoke quietly. "He's simply trying to stay alive." Michael's leaving compelled the Halls to face a reality they'd avoided for a long time. While their own lives had been frozen on October 12th, 2000, everybody else's kept rolling on. Folks departed town. Shops changed ownership. Kids were born, raised, and graduated and never knew Ava beyond the smiling woman on a yellowing missing person notice stuck to the post office wall. And yet, through it all, through dead ends, shattered hopes, medical skep, medical skep, medical skep, medical skeps, medical skep, Liam, medical skep, you medical skep, medical skep, medical skep, old medical skeps, medical skeps, medical skep, the whole med crime at dead. The vacant chair stayed in place. The foundation moved ahead, and the porch light burned each night, a gentle beacon of hope that one day Ava would return. "Hope is a discipline," Linda used to say. "Some days it's easy, and some days it's the hardest work I've ever done, but I will not give up hoping until I know." Little did they know that after 20 long years, that discipline would ultimately lead them to the truth, albeit not in the manner they had, and Detective Mark Ellison never dreamed he would be a cop. He grew up the son of a literature professor and a concert pianist, the kind of kid expected to wear a white coat, not a badge. In fact, he was deep into pre-med at the University of Louisville when fate stepped in. One evening, on the way home from grabbing a snack at a corner deli, Ellison was caught in the middle of a robbery. His steady testimony at trial later convicted the suspect, and the detective on the case, a quiet, introspective man named Robert Gaines, took him aside afterward. "You pay attention to things other people don't," Gaines said. "That's not something you can learn." Those words had a profound effect. Flash forward 27 years to January of 2020. Detective Mark Ellison, at age 52, occupied his desk at the Larue County Sheriff's Department, swamped by towering piles of bankers' boxes marked Hall, AVA, missing person, October 12, 2000. His dark hair was now streaked with gray, and a pair of reading glasses perched low on his nose. But his eyes, sharp, relentless, hadn't dulled a bit, especially when they landed on the photo of Ava that had sat on the corner of Ava that had sat on the corner of Ava that had sat on the corner of Ava. Throughout the years, Ellison had been dealing with all sorts of cases possible: burglaries, assaults, drug rings, even homicides. But Ava Hall's disappearance was the one that haunted him like a shadow. He'd been only a green rookie detective when she disappeared, one of the youngest on the task force. At the time, he clasped Daniel Hall's hand and pledged, "I won't rest until we get some answers." Unlike so many vows uttered in the heat of a cow's, For 20 years, each Monday morning, regardless of how hectic his caseload, Ellison devoted at least an hour re-examining some minor aspect of Ava's file. A report, a photograph, a statement from a witness. For 20 years, Detective Mark Ellison had done what most detectives would have quit doing years ago. He re-interviewed witnesses. He made the trek to the pharmacy parking lot every October 12th, the anniversary of Ava's vanishing, and stood in the very place where her car was discovered. And he remained in contact with the Hall family long after other cops had moved on quietly. At the depot, his colleagues had even nicknamed him Monday Mark. Some said it with respect, some with a grin, the sort reserved for someone who simply can't seem to move on. But Elisa, Tusel, Osselitzel Bros. Because this ritual, this dogged dedication, was something greater than routine. It was a vow he aimed to honor. And in January 2020, Monday Mark made a decision that would turn his quiet, personal mission into the Larue County Sheriff's Department's top priority. "I'm reopening the Hall case," he announced during the morning briefing, his tone steady but firm. The room of detectives and patrol officers fell silent. Papers stopped silent. Papers stop, stop. Papers stop, or something to stop, Fatoran erase. Deepen bites a second, stop hectoring the dot. Coffee cups hovered mid-air. "Not just reviewing it," he added, "reopening it with full resources." Sheriff Caroline Winters, the rookie patrol deputy when Ava disappeared, furrowed an eyebrow. "What's new, Mark?" Ellison pushed a folder along the table. Everything. What had shifted in reality was the infrequent convergence of opportunity and circumstance, as if planets moved into flawless orbit. First, Ellison had recently taken an advanced cold case methodology course at the FBI National Academy in Quantico. The training introduced him to new techniques for working on years-old cases and restarted his passion to discover the truth before it was too late. Second, the department had just acquired a technology grant with doors opening to state-of-the-art forensic equipment that smaller agencies like theirs could never have afforded in the past. And then there was the clock. Ellison was approaching mandatory retirement age. With almost 3 decades on the force, he had 9 months remaining before he'd be required to turn in his badge. But rather than riding into retirement, he saw one more opportunity to fulfill a promise. "Got 9 months before they bounce me," he informed Sheriff Winters in her office that day. "Let me use those months to wrap up this case." Winters sat back in her chair. She didn't require persuading. She had witnessed herself what Ava's vanishing had caused in this town. "What do you require?" she asked. "A task force," he replied. "To detect, and authorization to retest every item of physical evidence with the newest technology." The sheriff nodded, then hesitated. "You've got it. But, Mark," she looked at his eyes, "the Halls have gone through hell. Don't give them false hope." Ellison's face grew harder, the creases around his mouth deeper. "The only thing worse than no hope," he said softly, "is false hope. I know that. The Ava Hall task force was formed within a week. Ellison personally selected his small team, Detective Sophia Reyes, the sharp-witted ex-forensic technician with the knack for spotting the tiniest detail that everyone else overlooked. Detective James Washington, a young detective who was a specialist in digital forensics and data mining, the sort of new-school detective who could extract a thread from a vintage hard drive or an abandoned email log. The three of them converted a empty office into vigil, to empty office into the walls soon vanished under timeline charts, maps, and evidence photos tacked up in deliberate sequence. First on the agenda, a thorough, systematic reinspection of every last shred of physical evidence that had been gathered in 2000. Most had been run through what was then state-of-the-art equipment, but in 2020, it may as well have been ancient history. The unit cataloged everything, marking down those most likely to provide most likely to provide new. One of these was a single strand of human hair on the pavement next to Ava's car. At that time, DNA tests needed a root or follicle. This had neither, so it was recorded and discarded. But with mitochondrial DNA testing, even a hair shaft could now provide a genetic fingerprint. Another promising avenue was touch DNA, microscopic skin cells that linger when someone touches an object. In 2000, that type of test now. It was routine. Ellison had the keys found in Ava's car sent to the lab for touch DNA testing, hoping the individual who wiped the fingerprints off them had inadvertently left something smaller and much more revealing. 20 years ago, Detective Reyes had explained in one of their initial meetings, we needed a quarter-sized bloodstain to obtain a DNA profile. Today, we can obtain results from a few skin cells you can't eat. You can't generate you can't eat or so you too you it in a place some such you can't chew. He says you can't eat a King Ellison had nodded, awed and respectfully optimistic. Science, it appeared, had finally caught up with their resolve. At the same time, Detective Washington zeroed in on the digital side, conducting what he referred to as digital archaeology. He started excavating through long-abandoned electronic records, phone records, and archived data from 2000 that had been impossible to sift through at the time. Cell tower records from 2000 weren't necessarily high-tech by today's definition. Nevertheless, they contained potential clues if one knew how to interpret them. Compared to new GPS tracking, this is pretty much prehistoric, Detective Washington said with a sarcastic grin as he worked through stacks of dusty paper printouts. But even stale information can lead you somewhere if you look at it the right way. He explained that the original investigators had gathered cell tower pings from around the pharmacy the night Ava vanished, but they'd only searched for specific numbers tied to known persons of interest. We're not doing that, he told the task force. We're looking at every phone that connected to that tower during the critical window. It was laborious, detail-oriented work, but it was precisely the sort of digging cold cases called for. By March 2020, the team's dedication was rewarded. The mitochondrial DNA taken from the hair discovered alongside Ava's car did not match the first suspect list. But when uploaded to broader databases that did not exist 2 decades prior, the profile developed something new, a familial hit. The DNA was traced to a man by the name of Edward Hale, who had been convicted of assault in a nearby county back in 2005. Edward himself had never even stepped foot in Larue. He had no known association with Ava Hall, but as Detective Ellison continued his investigation, a name came up. Richard Hale, Edward's older brother, who had resided in Larue since 1995 and served as a local delivery driver. Ellison's furrowed brow as he sorted through the dusty case files. Richard Hale, he grumbled. Why doesn't that name crop up anywhere in our files? The answer wasn't found after hours of cross-referencing. In 2000, Richard had been employed by Midwest Parcel Express, but under the middle name, Joseph. and buried in the earliest witness accounts were a couple of casual references to a Joe from the delivery service who made deliver. He hadn't been interviewed because he wasn't working on that day. A reasonable oversight in a chaotic first investigation, but now it appeared to be an important mislead. Ellison ordered subtle surveillance as they quietly picked up more leads. Richard Joe Hale lived alone at 58 in a small ranch-style home on the outskirts of town. He continued to work as a driver, donate to the food bank, coach Little League, and go to First Bap. No criminal record, Washington told the paper. Not even a parking ticket in the past 10 years. Neighbors describe him as polite, considerate, quiet, the kind of man who snow blows your driveway without being asked. The task force walked gingerly. A weak DNA connection and some coincidences weren't sufficient to make direct confrontation necessary. Detective Reyes proposed a more subtle tactic. "Let's re-interview everyone from the original witness list," she suggested. "We'll ask about regular visitors, delivery drivers, service workers, and see if anyone mentions Hale on their own." It was a smart move. Friendly enough, but a bit persistent. Always had some excuse to come in and talk. I thought it was innocent then. Ava was a good-looking girl and men tend to notice, but in retrospect, maybe it wasn't so innocent. Another of her former coworkers, Brenda Simmons, provided an even more ominous detail. Ava once said she thought that delivery man was stalking her home, Brenda said. She laughed it off and told me she was just she laughed it off, told me she was just sliced laced. But then she told me she did begin to mix up her route home, just in case. Neither woman's memory could establish anything, but together their accounts created a chilling picture of a man who had been so keen on Ava during the weeks preceding her disappearance. The task force chose to dig even further into Richard Joe Hale's background. Detective Washington found that Hale had used 3 personal days right after October 12, 2000, something the initial investigators had no reason to search for at the time. Then the most astounding find of all. Vehicle registration records revealed that in 2000, the black 1998 Ford F-150 belonging to Richard Hale was the same make and color of truck Tom Gentry claimed to have seen outside the pharmacy. The black Ford F-150, which in the early stages of the investigation attracted nothing more than passing reference, had long since disappeared, or so it appeared. Documents indicated that it had been sold by Richard Hale to a junkyard in 2003, where it had been immediately crushed. To Ellison, that happened to be just too coincidental. By June of 2020, 6 months since the reopened case, the evidence, though circumstantial, was at last beginning to pile up. Hale's demeanor, his proximity to Ava, the similar truck, the mysterious personal leave days, and now this DNA tip. It was sufficient for Ellison to take the next firm action. "Everything we've done so far has been to get us to this moment," he told his team. "We do this by the book. One mistake, one mistake, one mistake, one mistake, one mistake, one mistake." After weeks of preparation in the law, the task force obtained a court-permitted warrant to obtain a DNA sample from Richard Hale. It was not an arrest, not yet, but the door opener to everything that was to follow. July 2020, a humid Kentucky morning. When Richard Hale opened his front door, his uniform polo half-tucked and a mug of coffee in hand, he found Detective Mark Ellison and 2 uniformed deputies standing on hay, Ellison said, offering a polite smile as he displayed his badge. "We're reviewing several old cases using new forensic methods. Just a routine DNA collection. A simple cheek swab. Won't take but a minute." It was technically true, just not entirely true. The task force had deliberately phrased the visit as a general review so as not to tip off Hale that he was under investigation. And the delivery driver, guarded but cooperative, whether but cooperative, whether your butts, whether but what rules go cheap, yes, and to let the car out of the word not wrong. He wells us out to boards four, and below the flows of US. I will tell what wolf. He even chatted briefly with Detective Reyes about how hot it was outside as the swab was taken. He didn't have a clue his life was about to come undone. The sample went to the state crime lab that same afternoon. Because of the case's historical significance and the department's clear chain of evidence, it was prioritized for immediate testing. 72 hours later, the results came back. The mitochondrial DNA extracted from the hair found beside Ava Hall's abandoned car matched Richard Hale with 99.8% certainty. Ellison read the lab report twice before whispering, "We've got him." For 2 decades, he'd gazed at the same picture of Ava on his desk each Monday morning, and now, at last, there was progress. The face behind the nameless silhouette in her narrative had a corresponding match. Equipped with the DNA verification, the task force acted quickly. In a matter of hours, they conducted simultaneous search warrants on Hale's residence, his current vehicle, his locker at work, and his electronic devices. Nothing could have prepared them for what they discovered. In a combination-locked gun safe in the basement of Hale's home, the combination, ominously enough, was Ava's birth date. Detectives found a small wooden box. In it were what Ellison would later call personal trophies. They included Ava's car keys, which had been missing, still clipped to her pharmacy key card, a silver bracelet her parents instantly recognized as hers, and a dark lock of hair neatly tied with a blue ribbon. The finds didn't end there. Behind Hale's well-manicured lawn, cadaver dogs hit on a particular patch of ground by the tool shed. The detectives started digging, and Quetzalcoatl and Keu. Within the bag were a woman's shoes and a blue sweater, still subtly stained with dirt, and something darker. Later forensic examination verified what the team suspected all along. The sweater had traces of human blood. The airtight container had retained the evidence much better than luck should have permitted. But the most shocking discovery wasn't entombed beneath the earth, it was quietly hidden away in the attic. There, piled in a beat-up cardboard box, detectives uncovered spiral-bound journals, each labeled and dated. The first had been written in 1998, 2 years before Ava's disappearance. What they read would send chills through the most veteran detectives. They weren't diaries. They were a blueprint of obsession, penned in Hale's own handwriting. The notebooks chronicled the tale Hale never admitted out loud, the gradual, compulsive slide of a man who deluded himself into believing his obsession was love. The earliest journals sounded innocent enough at first, observations about Ava's wardrobe, her smile, her courtesy to patrons. Casual encounters, Hale called them. But as detectives read on, Taltbus followed her home again today. She changes her route now. Smart girl. But I know where she lives, what she buys, who she sees. She's better off with someone who will appreciate her the way she deserves, not that teacher who treats her like dirt. By late 2000, the entries were unmistakably somber. Then the last note prior to Ava's disappearance, dated October 11th, 2000, 1 day before she disappeared, tomorrow. No more waiting. She'll get it built before she disappeared, tomorrow. No more waiting. She'll get it. For 3 weeks thereafter, the journals were quiet. When they picked up again, the tone was entirely different. The entries talked of keeping her safe now and how no one will ever hurt her again. To the task force, it was apparent Hale's writings were no fantasy. They were a guide to what he had done. Using the new information, Detective Ellison and his colleagues approached Tom Gentry, the owner of the hardware store, who was the last person. When a picture of Hale's worn-out black Ford pickup was shown to him, something resonated in Gentry's mind. "That's it," he said softly. "That's the truck I remember seeing that night. It was parked in a slot in front of her car as if someone was waiting. watching. I didn't think about it at the time. People back into spaces all the time. But now, yeah, that's it. That tiny but telling recollection, combined with cell tower tracking of Hale's phone outside the pharmacy near the end of business hours, even though there was no scheduled delivery that night, enabled police to piece together a probable timeline. They hypothesized that Hale, having stalked Ava for months and observed her routine, had waited in his truck until she completed her workday. When she lost her keys, which is something Tom Gentry recalled, Hale probably utilized it as an opportunity, a chance to be helpful, or establish some pretext for her to come to him. What ensued thereafter could only be surmised. The meeting had to be short, submissive, and silent. No other person within the car park claimed to have witnessed a struggle. To nondescript bystanders, it may have seemed as though Ava had walked away voluntarily, a chilling document of Hale's manipulation. The blood on the blue sweater eventually recovered from his property attested to violence, although if and when it took place, whether during the kidnapping or afterwards, was still unascertained. The jewelry and car keys he'd harbored weren't souvenirs of robbery, they were symbols of fixation. This wasn't a rant, this was planned. The culmination of an obsession that had obsessed him for years. After all the evidence had been assembled, Detective Ellison had the unwanted task of informing Linda and Daniel Hall that their hope had existed for 20 years and their heartbreak would only be a minute or two longer. He went to their house that night. Ava's picture, the one from her college acceptance day, remained on the mantel. Ellison sat before them, cat 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 before them, caps before them, cap swords of which, swords for, of the set before them silent, before them, cat before them, cat before them, got out swords into the star. He had known the Halls for years, trading news on each dead end and false lead, but that was not the case here. We have strong evidence, he started softly, that a man named Richard Hale, who was a delivery driver in Larue in 2000, was the one who abducted Ava. Linda's countenance was calm, but her eyes shook. Daniel looked down, fists balled. Evidence strongly indicates, Ellison went on, that Ava no longer exists. Ellison went on, that Ava no longer exists. We haven't found her remains yet, but we think we have an idea of what happened. There was silence, thick, choking silence, interrupted only by Daniel's desperate gasps. Then Linda, now in her 70s but still as stubborn as the day her daughter disappeared, asked the question she had harbored for 20 years, "What did happen to my daughter?" He told them all he could, the diaries, the DNA, the stalking evidence. He left out the worst of Worthen. He left out the word that an excellent towards his verbs or a He left out the word loaf. When he'd finished, Linda took her husband's hand, speaking firmly but with a quiver in her voice. "You're going to arrest him?" "Yes," Ellison replied. "Tomorrow morning. We wanted you to know before the news did." Daniel Hall remained still for some long seconds after the words of Detective Ellison had ended. His hands shook slightly in his lap, his eyes locked on the carpet as if seeking something tangible to cling to. And finally, he raised his head, his eyes bloodshot, his voice empty. "Will he tell us where she is?" Ellison leaned forward, his voice soft but firm. "We will do whatever is legally possible to obtain that information. Rescuing Ava and returning her home to you remains our #1 priority." When reports came out on March 15, 2023, of Richard Joseph Hale's arrest for the murder of Ava Hall, they shocked the peace of neighbors who had once waved to him from their front porches now turned away from their windows in shock. Parishioners at First Baptist Church, where Hale had volunteered to stock hymnals and umpire Little League, were agog. The genial delivery man who'd been part of the furniture was suddenly exposed as a deliberate predator. The local paper best captured the atmosphere. For 2 decades, he delivered our packages, our mail, our goodwill. And all the while, he bore a secret blacker than anyone's imagination. Initially, Hale had denied everything. He said the evidence was fabricated, the diaries were fictional writing exercises, and the DNA was manipulated. But as prosecutors presented the mounting pile of evidence, DNA, cell phone records, testimony from witnesses, and Ava's personal belongings being found, something cracked. With a possible death penalty trial looming, Hale eventually accepted a plea agreement. In return for life without possibility of parole, he would give a speechless confession and take investigators to Ava's remains. On a rainy April morning nearly 90 miles from Larue, Hale directed detectives deep into a remote section of Daniel Boone National Forest. The narrow path wound through dense pine and wet clay soil until he stopped beneath a cluster. There, forensic teams began to dig. Within hours, they unearthed skeletal remains, carefully wrapped in remnants of plastic sheeting. Dental records verified what everyone dreaded: Ava Hall had finally been located. The Hall family was finally able to take their daughter home after 23 years. The resolution of Ava's case was a landmark case of how persistence and advancing technology can meet and develop long-hidden truth. The hair sample, which had been useless back in 2000, was re-examined with more sophisticated mitochondrial DNA testing, revealing Hale's maternal connection. The car keys, preserved in the airtight container he buried, yielded touch DNA that matched his profile. Even the old cell tower data, once just lines of numbers on a printout, revealed connection patterns invisible to investigators 2 decades earlier. But outside of the technology, it was the absolute dedication of Detective Mark Ellison that kept the case open. For 2 decades, through retirements, transfers, and frigid winters, he had refused to allow Ava's memory to succumb to another unsolved case folder. This case isn't just about true crime, a local journalist observed. It's about true dedication. If this story moved you, share it with someone who believes in the power of persistence, and don't forget to subscribe. In the next chapter, we'll explore the trial revelations that left Larue questioning everything it thought it knew about trust, appearances, and the monsters who sometimes live in plain sight. Born in 1962 in Bowling Green, Kentucky, Hale's early years offered no obvious warning signs. Friends from school remembered him as quiet, polite, and almost invisible. "You'd forget he was there," one former classmate said. He was the kind of kid who never made trouble and never stood out. After leaving college with average marks, Hale made a series of unskilled jobs: hardware clerk, night watchman, temporary farm laborer, succeeding each one for only a few months. He had no close buddies, no steady girlfriends, and no record of arrest. His life was humdrum to the point of obscurity. In 1995, at 33 years old, he relocated to Larue after being hired by Midwest Parcel Express, a minor regie. It was, in retrospect, the ideal arrangement. That's the brilliance of it, Detective Ellison would later inform prosecutors. Delivery men, mailmen, electricians, they're ubiquitous and invisible at the same time. You see them all the time, but you don't see them. They become part of the background. The work provided Hale with access to houses, stores, and most significantly, to people's habits. It's how he initially encountered Ava Hall, who worked behind the pharmacy counter on his delivery route. His colleagues remembered him as being detailed. His truck was clean. His logs were immaculate. He never took a day off sick, never griped, and never took vacation. He was the perfect employee and the ultimate camouflage for a predator. Joe was the one you could always count on to fill in for your route if you had to take a day off, said Tet. He never griped, never expected anything back. We all just figured he was a good guy, and that is precisely how Richard Joe Hale wished to be viewed. He constructed his persona piece by piece, a picture of dependability and unobtrusive largesse that reached far beyond his work at Midwest Parcel Express. In Larue, he emerged as the ideal small-town resident. In a matter of weeks of residing there, Hale became a member of First Baptist Church, attending every Sunday service and offering to lead Sunday school for the 8- and 9-year-olds. He assisted with setting up booths during the annual Harvest Festival, operated the apple bobbing stand, and eventually even coached Little League Baseball for the Larue Tigers. Strangely, he always asked to coach the older boys' teams, never the younger divisions, a fact that seemed innocuous then but would later cause uneasy thought. By 1998, after 3 years in a small apartment, Hale purchased a little ranch-style house on Maple Street. Just like everything else about his life, it was perfect. The lawn was well manicured, the 3-year-old paint freshly applied, and the porch tastefully decorated for every seas. Inspeally decorated for every seas. Neighbors of neutral. He was the type of neighbor you dream about, Martha Gaines, who lived directly across the street from him for 15 years, said. He'd plow your driveway before you even got up in the morning after a blizzard. When we went on vacation, he'd watch the property. He never married, had kids. I guess he considered the neighborhood his family. Every December, Hale would deliver homemade Christmas cookies to every doorstep, each with a tightly written note expressing gratitude to neighbors for their friendship. To all who knew him, he was a reserved, considerate man, slightly clumsy, perhaps, but inoffensive. That mild awkwardness, in fact, was something most people explained away. When he lingered too long in conversation or stood a bit too close, folks chalked it up to loneliness or pure. We made excuses for him, Martha admitted after his arrest. Looking back, there were moments that made me uncomfortable. But then he'd do something kind, and I'd feel guilty for doubting him. That was the brilliance and terror of Hale's deception. He knew precisely how to get people to believe him. In one of his unearthed 1997 journals, he had penned ominously, "People trust the helpful neighbor. No one suspects the historical." Those were the words that unlocked the secret to how he got to blend in for decades. The 37 spiral notebooks in his attic would come to yield a chilling glimpse of Hale's inner life. The earliest entries, written during his time in Bowling Green, identified women he had become interested in: waitresses, bank tellers, a librarian. He documented their habits, their attire, their daily routines. None of those initial obsessions seemed to have gone violent, but each one of them showed a definite pattern, an increasing need to watch, own, and dominate. And then, in 1996, a new name popped up: Ava Hall. New pharmacist at Larue Pharmacy. Young. Dark hair. Nice smile. Name tag says Ava. It began innocently enough, a passing comment about a woman he met along his route. But in weeks, the references became routine. By 1997, Hale was documenting each encounter, no matter how fleeting. Delivered packages to pharmacy 10:15 a.m. Ava wearing blue sweater, hair in a ponytail. Asked me if I had a cold because my voice sounded off. Noticed the difference in my voice. She notices me. What could be harmless to a stranger had a sinister note to it when put into context. Hale was not watching, he was interpreting, turning mundane nice naked stamply, turning mundane nice intelligent terror. He was interpreting, turning mundane nice and Gortmgrauth, Gortmudfluence or. He was like Lord. Law, quarterly night buffet reduce. I still want part of By 1998, his fixation had grown stronger. He was stalking her outside of work, chronicling her activities with eerie meticulousness. Saw Ava at grocery store 6:30 p.m. She didn't notice me. Picked up same brand of orange juice she placed in her cart. Drinking it now. Connection. The entries became more dark and delusional. Ava with that teacher again at restaurant. He doesn't deserve her. She laughed at something he says her. She laughed at something he says she said she doesn't deserve her. She laughed at something he says he says that I can tell the difference. She's settling because she doesn't know I'm waiting. He began imagining a life shared, one specifically of home, of marriage, of future, with someone who knew him hardly beyond courteous exchange. Our house will have yellow kitchen because she said once that yellow is a happy color. Every line of it showed a man building a whole world based on the fantasy. a world in which Ava was his, whether she wished it or not. Alles swam till Oslinitsim. I'll also work to sit the song. I love song or house and or in Sinostis and Alice was the Surrey. She'll at last have someone who hears, someone who truly observes her. She'll realize eventually that everything I did was for us. That sentence, buried in one of Richard Hale's notebooks, was the place where fantasy met delusion. As the investigators continued reading, it was apparent that Hale's fixation on Ava Hall had escalated from subtle infatuation to something much more sinister. When Ava ignored his advances, he did not take her silence as disinterest, he took it as confusion. She just wasn't aware yet that they were destined to be together in his own mind. He started documenting each unsuccessful try at connection, each perceived sign of tender. A single diary entry from the summer of 2000 was remarkable. Try to initiate a conversation regarding the novel that she was reading last week. She seemed puzzled. Asked why I knew what she was reading, realized I had made a blunder. Caught her reading it in her car on her lunch break when she had no idea I was observing. Covered by saying I saw it sitting on her desk. She appeared to believe me but was cold towards me afterward. Have total the rail, have tapped her. Have to blank, have tick, have ten click to stew. Adult, televersal, that is have Tutzel have the. In September of that same year, the tone of his writing had shifted completely. She belongs with me. I've been patient. I've waited. I've prepared everything. But she's blind, distracted. Sometimes the only way to help someone see the truth is to remove all other options. The subsequent entries were methodically, chillingly calculated. He laid out his strategy for seeing Ava, practicing every line, every step, even specifying how he'd capitalize if she were to drop her keys once more. Innocent action that he could manipulate as a chance meeting. He stopped writing on October. He stopped writing on October. Now he is steer on four students. If this is some tunes to low, Barclays, just so articulable. And so almost 3 weeks had passed when writing began again, broken, distraught, and thoroughly disturbing. She's safe now, protected. No more distractions. Had to help her understand. Resistance was temporary. No one will ever take her from me now. And perhaps the most disturbing of all were his notes about the search efforts that followed her disappearance. Join search party today. Everyone looking in the wrong places. Their pain is real but unnecessary. If they only knew she's exactly where she needs to be. He even attended prayer vigils and stood beside Ava's grieving father. Stood beside her father this evening. Wanted to inform him that she's at peace now. Would that be an act of kindness, or what would that be an act of kindness, or what would that be an act of kindness, or would that be an act of kindness, or what did the arbiter? What the rose unschluget? Or will the sir be children with what's more allied to this? Chose to remain silent. Through the years, Hale was able to incorporate his guilt, if you could even refer to it as that, into the fabric of his everyday. He keeps clippings from the newspaper regarding Ava's case, gives to the Ava Hall Foundation, and visits remembrance rallies. To the world outside of his, he remained the same benevolent bachelor, the delivery guy who never forgot to wave, the neighbor who cleared your driveway, the coach who ate. But beneath, his thoughts were something much more sinister. When he was finally assessed after being arrested, psychologists found him to have erotomania, a delusional disorder in which one genuinely believes that someone, usually of higher standing, is in love with them. Coupled with malignant narcissism and antisocial tendencies, it made for a toxic mix of obsession and sense of entitlement. Forensic psychologist Dr. Rebecca Thornton on the case explained it thusly: when reality did not conform to his fantasy, he preferred to destroy her instead of relinquishing his ownership. Retaining her belongings and remaining engaged in the case enabled him to maintain a sense of connection to her and to the loss he inflicted. In one 2010 entry posted on the anniversary of Ava's disappearance, Hale exposed just how distorted that gratification had grown. Assisted hung missing posters today. Mrs. Hall thanked me, squeezed hand. If they only knew, the perfect crime isn't getting away with it. It's being thanked by your victims. Richard Hale led a double life for over 20 years. To his neighbors, he was the epitome of decency. But in reality, that person never existed. The good neighbor was nothing but a facade, a costume for the monster in plain sight. He was never the man they believed him to be. Richard Hale had been an act, a facade of sweetness and dependability covering up a monster who'd been hiding in plain sight for decades. It's frightening when you stop to consider it, isn't it? How one man can walk among us, becoming such an integral part of our lives and yet harbor such terrible secrets. I'm curious, has it ever happened that you found out that a person you knew wasn't what they seemed? A neighbor, a coworker, even a friend? In retrospect, were there subtle hints you overlooked or instances that later made perfect sense once the truth was revealed? I'd love to hear your opinion. Leave your comments below. Let's also close the comments. Let's the death murder hit at the ball of that ordered itself with all the flip of the target. The top of apocalypse, I'm there. I can't guys. Let's all the links up our floods led. The arrest of Richard Hale was executed with the kind of precision you'd expect from a military operation. At exactly 5:17 a.m. on March 15, 2023, a tactical team from the Kentucky State Police surrounded his quiet Maple Street home while most of Larue still slept. Detective Ellison had selected the early time specifically. He wanted to stop Hale from destroying evidence, eliminate the public spectacle, and most importantly, to deprive him of the pleasure of being observed. After all, Hale had constructed his whole life according to appearances. Body camera video from that morning caught it all. The front door creaking open, Hale standing there in striped pajamas and scuffed slippers, his gray hair pointing every which way from sleep. His face changed from confusion to comprehension to unspoken defeat as Ellison started reading the charges: first-degree murder, kidnapping, tampering with evidence, and several more. Every count was like another brick falling from the deceitful life he had constructed. "I don't get it," Hale repeated over and over again as officers cuffed him. "There's some kind of mistake." But the quick look he darted toward the basement door said, "But to village door." As the film sorts, the dirty door sports, to click flow, let's start so skill, let's the sacred to go, but this steep, but so short. But the quick look he darted toward the basement door says, down there in a locked gun safe, police would later discover Ava Hall's personal items, concrete evidence of the terror he'd concealed behind that friendly grin. By dawn, the news had traveled like fire through Larue. Neighbors who had known Hale for years stood outside coffee shops and diners, hushed with wide eyes. They struggled to put together the man who'd managed their kids' Little League teams and brought Christmas cookies to the door with the creature the morn. "I invited him into my home," said Martha Gaines, her voice shaking. "He held my newborn granddaughter in his arms last Christmas. How could we have not known?" That one question, how could we not have known, was the refrain of the day. Parents replayed old memories, looking for warning signs they had perhaps missed. Members of First Baptist Church sifted through pictures of children's pageants he had volunteered to take for years. Pastor Robert Jenkins spoke to his congregation during an emergency prayer service that night. "There is no indication that he ever hurt any child in our church," he said, "but the breach of trust itself is a blow to this community." The story burst onto national headlines. Satellite trucks lined Main Street. Reporters jammed the sidewalks, soliciting interviews with shocked residents. The town was electrified. The case had all the ingredients that drew national attention: a decades-long mystery, a favorite victim, a pillar of the community revealed as predator, and a solution courtesy of new forensic science. For the Hall family, the arrest brought an agonizing blend of grief and relief. After 23 years of uncertainty, they finally had an answer, but it came at a terrible price. Daniel Hall, Ava's father, told Detective Ellison shortly after Hale's confession led them to her remains. "We've existed on maybe for so long. Maybe she's alive somewhere. Maybe she'll come home. Maybe the phone will ring. Now we know. It's awful, but it's sure." Numerous pallbearers carried empty prescription bottles with wildflowers inside, a simple yet lovely testimony to Ava's career as a pharmacist and the kindness she had bestowed on others. Meanwhile, the man who had ended her life sat in solitary confinement in a cell at the Kentucky State Penitentiary under suicide watch for the trial that would finally reveal him for all the world to see. Hale's defense lawyer, Melissa Thornton, was faced with one of the worst dilemmas any attorney could ever have defending a man hated by a whole town and buried beneath a pile of incriminating evidence. Initially, Thornton attempted a mental competency path. She demanded psychological tests, contending that Hale's strange journals were an indication of a break with reality, perhaps sufficient to render him incapable of standing trial. But that line of argument soon wore thin. The tests were definitive. Yes, Richard Hale had a multiple personality disorder, but he was aware full well what he had done and what he was charged with. He was legally sane and competent to defend himself. With that door shut, Thornton turned to damage control. Off the record, she started behind-the-scenes negotiation with Commonwealth Attorney James Barton, see if a deal could be cut. But Azar Iversdot but not at first. At a press conference, Barton's voice was crisp and calculated. "Today's case is the worst kind of predatory activity. This defendant didn't just kill a young woman, he harassed her family for years by becoming part of their searches, standing with them at vigils, feigning concern. The Commonwealth feels death is the ultimate punishment." And with that, he made official what everyone had assumed. The state was seeking the debt, but after the summer of 2023, something changed. Hale, perhaps seeing the futility of his circumstance, granted his lawyer permission to make a proposal. For a life sentence in prison rather than death, he would confess completely, giving every detail of what had been done to Ava and taking investigators to her grave. It was a hard call for the prosecutor. A trial would most likely result in a death sentence, yes, but it would also subject the Hall family to months of graphic testimony and revive painful memories. And there was no promise Hale would ever tell them where he'd taken Ava. Following a conversation with the Halls, the decision became obvious. They desired closure over revenge, so Barton agreed. The agreement was this: Hale would plead to first-degree murder and kidnapping in return for life without parole and his complete cooperation. When the plea hearing on September 12, 2023 arrived, the courtroom could not contain the throng. Hundreds filled the corridors, compelling officials to broadcast the hearing to overflow rooms. For Larue's residents, this was the day they had waited more than 2 decades for. Richard Hale walked into the courtroom in chains and gaunt, his hair pale gray, his eyes on the ground. The orange jumpsuit he was wearing seemed to divest him of the illusion he'd maintained for so long. There was no friendly smile now, only vacancy. Judge Marilyn Conroy, who had a reputation for being firm and no-nonsense, spoke directly to him. "Before I accept your plea, I want to be clearly certain of what you are admitting to." She toast into what you are admitting to. She tochim if what you are admitting to. She toasly elsie. She totes my message. She toastless sort for plea. I want it is legislate. "You know that you are pleading guilty to the kidnapping and premeditated murder of Ava Hall on October 12, 2000? "Yes, Your Honor," Hale answered softly. "And you comprehend that, in return for the Commonwealth agreeing not to pursue the death penalty, you'll serve out the rest of your natural life in prison without parole?" "Yes, Your Honor." And then came the moment no one in that room would ever forget. What came next was a confession so deliberate, so devoid of feeling that many courtroom observers had to leave halfway through. Hale described step by step how he'd stalked Ava for months, learning her routine, practicing his move, plotting every step. "When I saw her lose her keys," he said, his tone cool and flat, "I knew it was the moment I'd been waiting for." He informed the court that Ava knew him from his delivery route and therefore she was not frightened when he came close. As both of them stooped to search for her keys, he placed a cloth that had been soaked in chloroform across her nose and mouth. This one detail told what witness Tom Gentry witnessed that evening, Ava present for an instant and vanished into thin air. Hale explained how he had carried her unconscious form to his truck and driven her out into Daniel Boone National Forest, where he had rented a secluded cabin under an assumed name. The courtroom was motionless, aside from the scratch of pens against notepads and the muted cries of a few in the audience who had cared about Ava Hall. The most vivid account of what happened in that isolated cabin was blacked out of public records, out of Perot. What was established, however, was chilling enough. Court filings indicated Ava had been imprisoned for about 48 hours prior to her death, a timeline that precisely fit Hale's mysterious 3-day disappearance from work. Hale reported to police that Ava died following an attempt to escape. Whether or not that was true or a convenient fabrication, nobody could say. What was important is that after her death, he buried her body deep in Daniel Boone National Forest, afterward returning to Larue and falling back into his regular life, making deliveries again, going to church, even searching for the woman he killed. As Judge Conroy questioned him directly about why he had participated in those searches, Hale's reply froze the courtroom. "I wanted to be part of it. It made me feel important, knowing what no one else knew." After Hale's admission, Commonwealth Attorney James Barton delivered a brief but damning review of evidence that would have been introduced at trial: the mitochondrial DNA match from the hair discovered near Ava's car, touch DNA from her wiped keychain, cell tower records placing Hale's phone in the vicinity of the pharmacy on the day she vanished with no worker. She vanished with no worker. Tower teaser. And no work at time to break rounds of area says when I know for a prosecutor to do a in my smiling sort. You shouldn't live you do yells in sight night. My swear sitting out of work. We hear style for that press. Program with her report checks out. The diaries, years long, documenting his fixation and elaborate schemes. The mementos, Ava's car keys, bracelet, and lock of her hair kept in his basement safe. The bloody clothes hidden under his garden. And then the worst proof of all, the diary entries Hale wrote following the murder. Barton read a few of them aloud, his voice firm but weighted. "Saw Mrs. Hall faint at the prayer vigil today. Her suffering is a living thing, apparent if curate, is a living thing, apparent et rively apparent a librata. You're apparent e a rival spresh and flap support chinklachal, and a more sling apparent a right challenge, and a slang bevrel. I could put an end to that suffering with a few words, but I'd lose my bond at the same time. Some things are too valuable to tell." The ensuing silence was oppressive. After Barton concluded, Judge Conroy asked the Hall family to speak to the court. Haltingly, Linda Hall, now 76 but still exuding quiet strength, moved to the podium. She gazed straight at Richard Hale for the first time. "For 23 years, I reserved a seat for my daughter at our table," she started, her voice crisp and unshakable. "For 23 years, I left her bedroom prepared for her return. For 23 years, I woke up each morning hoping today would be the day we located her. And for 23 years, you let us endure, knowing you had the power to stop that suffering with a word." She hesitated, her hands shaking slightly as she breathed slightly as she breathed slight. "Ava was light and goodness and love. To allow hatred for you to fill me would be a betrayal of everything she stood for. So instead, I'll say this: while you rot the rest of your life in a cell, you will be remembered as a monster. Ava will be remembered for kindness and compassion and the lives she changed. That's her triumph over you." Judge Conroy, clearly overcome, accepted the plea and issued the negotiated sentence: life imprisonment without chance of parole, to be served at the Eastern Kentucky Correctional Complex, a maximum security institution. issuing one final order as she prepared to adjourn. Every one of Mr. Hale's journals, writings, and trophies must be destroyed after the termination of his appeal period. He shall not keep, even symbolically, the symbols of his delusion. And then fixing her gaze at Hale, she continued, "You have caused incalculable harm, not just to the Hall family, but to a community. There are no extenuating factors that call for mercy beyond that already shown. You will spend the remainder of your life reflecting on the lives you ruined, yours included." As Hale was escorted out, the courtroom sat absolutely still, only a collective sigh from a town that had been holding its breath for 23 years. And although the pulse of Ava Hall's case was now officially broken, its afterbeats rang out throughout Larue, in vacant streets, in silent prayers, and in the glance neighbors now gave just a little more to the people they thought they understood. For the Hall family, discovery brought relief, yes, but also an emptiness that's difficult to put into words. Their entire lives, for 23 years, had centered around the quest for Ava. Now their quest was done, and they were left to reassemble a life without the very purpose that had sustained them through all those long, uncertain years. The vacant chair at their dinner table, the one they had reserved for Ava, was finally taken away. In its stead, they created something lovely, the Ava Hall Memorial Scholarship, given to pharmacy students who commit their professional lives to working with rural communities, just as Ava wanted to do. For years, our lives were defined by absence, Linda Hall said at the scholarship's launch, her voice steady but warm. Now, we're trying to create presence to turn our loss into something that helps others. Daniel Hall, on the other hand, had his own way of keeping the spirit of Ava alive. The man who had devoted so many weekends scouring the hillsides of Kentucky now helps teach, search, and rescue dogs for organizations. At the age of 78, he was the oldest certified state canine handler and worked with a black Labrador named Hope. "I couldn't locate Ava," he explained to a local journalist, his voice choked with emotion. "But perhaps I can assist in ensuring that other families don't have to wait 23 years for answers." For the citizens of Larue, the healing was also complex. Internalizing the knowledge that Richard Hale, their cheerful delivery driver, Sunday school instructor, and Little League coach, had led a secret life was almost too difficult to reconcile. It wasn't merely a crime, it was a breaking of faith. First Baptist Church, where Hale had previously taught, rewrote every volunteer policy top to bottom. The Little League instituted required background checks and a two-adult rule for all youth programs. These actions couldn't undo what had occurred, but they represented the commitment of a community to safeguard its future, however difficult the lessons of its past. And then Ava, remembered at last not as the girl who vanished, but as the at the pharmacy where she had worked, colleagues erected a tiny memorial garden featuring a plaque honoring her care and commitment to patients. The public library initiated an annual mystery reading program in her memory because Ava had adored mystery novels. The history of her case even altered the way law enforcement handled cold cases in the state on cold cases in the state. Detective Mark Ellison, a man who retired after Hale's conviction, put his experience to work and created a foundation that assists smaller police agencies in paying for up-to-date forensic tests. His Monday method, the act of setting aside one day a week for going through unsolved cases, regardless of how hectic things became standard procedure in some counties. Justice doesn't expire, Ellison said at his retirement session. What Ava's case taught us is that perseverance, added to changing technology, can shed light on mysteries that were once unbreakable. For the investigators, prosecutors, and scientists who had spent years working the case, the verdict last week was satisfaction and sadness. They had uncovered the truth, yes, but that truth was wrapped in sorrow. As Commonwealth Attorney James Barton phrased it, cold case justice is bittersweet by nature. Cold case justice is bittersweet by nature.
Cold we. Is Berlixming to place every else illos velus sin erase submer jingle. I inside here, servicemen. Environment.
We can't undo the crime or erase decades of suffering. All we can do is provide answers and accountability to close a circle that's remained painfully open for too long. Today in Larue Cemetery, Ava's gravestone has a simple epitaph selected by her parents: beloved daughter, cherished friend, finally at rest. Underneath those words is a quote from one of her favorite mystery books: "The truth, when it arrives, is always different that the one different that the war is always different when like your books." If this case touched you as much as it's touched me, I'd like to invite you to subscribe to this channel. Every case we report honors victims like Ava and brings credit to investigators who won't quit, no matter how cold the trail becomes.